Nootropics are being sold everywhere by wellness and lifestyle influencers. Now, these are legal things like lion's mane, ginseng, and also L-theanine with caffeine. They're often sold as cognitive enhancers, as in they supposedly help us focus our brain. And I say supposedly there because there are question marks around the validity of some of these claims. My point is, this is just one example of biohacking. There's been a massive growth of these things on the market recently, and that's linked to a number of things, including consumer demand for increased productivity and mental performance, increased awareness in our mental health, but also advances in things such as neuroscience. And along with that, the popularity of certain online neuroscientists who've turned influencers with huge social media followings. But this is not going to be a video about the value of biohacking methods. There's going to be no optimization advice. I'm going to stand on neutral grounds about my own views on biohacking. I'm a criminology university lecturer. I'm not a health professional. And truth be told, I'm not really that interested in whether biohacking actually works or not. The question I do want to ask is biohacking another example of how the wellness industry is harming your health? So let's back up a minute and think about nootropics. Now, nootropics are genuine products. Elements of them are science-backed, although with some caveats, essentially getting us used to the idea that it's kind of becoming normal to try and enhance our cognitive abilities, our mindset, our productivity, our focus. And they're often positioned as an enhancer. Some might try to claim they override brain fog and fatigue. Some might claim they help you to be more focused and more productive. And regardless of the individual evidence for each of these claims, which will depend on the product and on the different components of the product, it does seem like an impressive sales pitch where we live in a world where we all feel knackered and burned out and overwhelmed and unproductive. Yet at the same time, everyone wants more of us. We need to be faster, we need to be fitter, we need to be quicker, we need to be making more money. Now, most nootropics are sold as foodstuffs, as supplements, rather than as medicine, which is important in terms of the law, because it means that they're subject to different laws and different regulations if it was medicine. You might be thinking, well, is she going to tell us about how these products might be toxic? No, that's not what I'm going to do here either. I'm not actually even going to try and argue that the sale of nootropics is harmful to you. Certainly not at the surface level anyway, in terms of the ingredients of the product. But what I do want to note about the huge popularity of nootropics is a number of things. So one, there might be misleading claims about some of their abilities. Two, money you might waste if the product isn't as effective as you've been told it is. Three, they might give you unrealistic expectations about what the product might do. Four, they can contribute towards normalising the enhancement of ourselves. And five, they might create a dependency on optimization products. And I say a dependency there, not an addiction. That's an important distinction. So if we're discussing the harm, then yeah, all of those things could be described in some ways as harmful. And I would suggest that all of those five things are in some way possible or likely, given the huge boom and explosion of these products which we've seen and how heavily popularized they are on social media. But the law is there to protect us, right? And as long as nootropic companies stick to the law and follow the regulations and sell us safe products, we don't need to be worried, surely. But there have been some enforcement cases against nootropic companies, particularly for some of the claims they've made in their marketing about what the products can do, enforced by the ASA, and the companies are told, look, you can't be making these claims about your product. There isn't the scientific evidence to back up these claims you're making. The ASA has responsibility to ensure that adverts aren't misleading or giving false information. Nootropics also became popular thanks to Nutrigenomics, and this is where we're encouraged to understand our biological individuality. So this is essentially another form of biohacking where our gene and food interaction that is set out to be understood. And to do that, you do that through DNA testing. The idea is that you can eat the most optimized diet for you personally. So you can identify if there's certain illnesses or conditions you're more predisposed to, and therefore you can only eat foods which would least cause the risk of that, or foods which might help play a preventative role in that. But essentially what this means is through this DNA testing, you can eat a really individualized, personalized nutrition for you with a paid subscription, of course. But biohacking doesn't just stop there. We now have the ability to continually monitor ourselves and not just monitoring ourselves by our smartwatches or Oura rings. You might well have seen continuous glucose monitors being advertised on your socials. Now, these devices, which were originally invented for the management of diabetes, where of course glucose monitoring is something which needs to happen all of the time, they've been rolled out to the wider consumer market and pitched as a device which can help everyday health markers, and particularly in terms of athletes. And this adoption of these continuous glucose monitors, or CGMs, has been heavily encouraged by the companies which make and sell them. No surprises there. But also by the personalised nutrition companies I mentioned just before. Now, there has been a little bit of research into the use of these CGMs by the broader consumer market. So I'm not talking about the diabetic group of people here. I'm talking about the people who are using them for health advantages rather than as a medical necessity. And this was a research paper by Nicola Guess in 2023, whose article discussed the issues that might arise from this new trend, around how it might pathologize normal glucose spikes post-exercise, also how it might encourage people to avoid food which they don't need to. Also, by taking a glucose-centric approach to nutrition, this paper questioned whether it might increase someone's cardiovascular risks of a disease of actually what they're setting out trying to avoid. So that's just one example of research paper, but if you have a look through some of the studies, there is yet to be this concrete evidence about their use in the wider population, and there's still question marks about whether it's overall positive or whether there's some risks which come with that as well. You've probably heard of Bryan Johnson. This is his Instagram. I'm going to put it on the screen now. And he's also got a Netflix documentary. So Bryan is actively trying to biohack his body to avoid dying. But also more recently, he was diagnosed with an autoimmune disease, and so he's trying to biohack a cure to the autoimmune disease. One thing you'll notice if you look at Bryan's socials is his willingness and desire to experiment with using peptides. Now, peptides have been getting loads of attention just recently. It's really popped off in terms of discussions on social media about their use, but also about some of the risks with them as well. And various claims about their potential sit alongside claims and concerns around their unregulated and their untested nature. And of course, the peptides, which we get in particular concern around the claims, are not the ones which are already approved for use in health settings. These are the ones which are more experimental or are not currently approved for human consumption and use. That doesn't seem to stop people like Bryan Johnson, who are using themselves as these live social media experiments about trying them out. So taking peptides with a caveat that they're doing so with the view of this being research purposes only. But apparently we don't need clinical trials anymore. Before I go on, I just want to talk a little bit about a research paper which was published very, very recently, back in June 2026. And this looked at unregulated peptide use and also biohacking cultures. So this study in particular was not concerned with how peptides are being used in approved medical use. It's more the consumer experimentation with the unregulated and untested forms of peptides. And in this study, they concluded that although peptide-based medicines have important and legitimate roles in modern clinical care, their growing visibility has contributed towards a less regulated consumer marketplace where experimental or weakly evidence products are promoted for optimization, aesthetics, performance recovery, and longevity. And they say that the key public health concern is not the peptide therapeutics themselves, but the normalisation, fully traceable peptide products which are used outside of clinical, regulatory, and pharmacovigilance systems. So what they're saying there is their particular concern in terms of public health policy is not so much about the use of peptides. It's about the normalisation of people just trying stuff out in a completely unregulated and uncontrolled way. So just buying some products from an unregulated marketplace and then making their own concoctions to try stuff out, which is not the way things normally would get approved for human consumption. The peptides then are quite a jump from supplements like nootropics, which might have some dubious claims about what they can do, but are safe for use and are approved for use. But how do things like nootropics and personalised nutrition plans and CMGs all contribute to the normalisation of how we're all doing our own biohacking and these biohacking cultures which are mentioned in the paper I just talked about? This leads me to question, does the normalisation of biohacking at all of these levels, does this promote risky behaviour and chances of using or experimenting with unregulated or untested and even potentially unsafe products. We could suggest that the wellness industry takes people from probably quite simple entry points of lifestyle hacks, so maybe cold ice plunges, which were in fashion a while ago, or even just things like good sleep, to then personalising our diet and then buying products to monitor our glucose or DNA testing our blood so that we can eat personalised nutrition. Of course, all of these things are supported by health tech features. But does that then enable us to then jump to these untested and unregulated biochemical solutions like some of the peptides we're seeing used and promoted at the moment on social media? And for me, I think it's this normalisation shift where we can find the answer to the original question I asked about, does the wellness industry promote harm? So I don't want to say that nootropics and other similar types of enhancers or other kind of low-level biohacking methods are harmful or problematic or are even like dodgy products. That's not what I'm trying to point out here. What I am trying to point out is how these legal markets create the space and also shape and push our willingness to try more and more things out. And this might be despite any risks which we may or may not be aware of. So essentially what I'm saying is the legal wellness industry serves as a ideological but also an actual playground to try out biohacking. We get used to doing biohacks. These hacks become everyday for us. They become normal. Before we know it, we're drinking our daily nootropic drink. We're optimizing our nutrition to achieve our fastest marathon time or to achieve better health scores. We start to monitor our glucose and maybe other biomarkers as well. It becomes completely and utterly normal for us to equate being healthy with these kinds of hacks, are biohacking, with the products we've bought and which we've subscribed to. It feels like everyone is doing it around us too. It's costing me a fair bit, but without this, I might not be my optimized best self. I might be less productive. I might never achieve that sub 3-hour marathon I'm so desperate to do. I'm nowhere near sub 3-hour marathon, but everyone else seems to be getting towards a sub 3-hour marathon. We start to think of ourselves as the lab rat, but now we're at lab rat status. We start to question whether we might need to only be using the scientifically proven or the safe products which are available and tested and legal. We've seen people all over social media tell us about their own personal success stories with their experimentation of things for research purposes only. We hear them tell us that this is only happening because research and evidence and science is slow. They know it's safe, they know it's coming, so therefore they're ahead of the game. They're already engaging with these new hacks. Why wait for the evidence to come out for a research trial when you can be your own research trial? You can just watch someone else on Instagram or on YouTube conduct experiments on themselves, and you can do that too. At this point, you're so far in, you're so committed to being your perceived best version of yourself. You're so used to tweaking every detail you can to optimize everything. Everyone else is doing it. I mean, for God's sake, there was even a human enhancement games where this kind of stuff was legit encouraged and promoted with huge financial incentives for somebody to break a record, although it's debatable whether a record being used by doping being broken would actually matter. But that's another point completely. We're just pushing at the boundaries what's humanely possible, right? Now, one of the key mistakes I have seen as a criminologist who has been researching illicit and illegal markets for the last 20 years now. It's a mistake people make when they think of illicit or illegal or even grey markets as some kind of like seedy, back alley, dodgy, shifty gangster kind of thing, where the people selling the illegal or the semi-legal products are these kind of like dangerous criminals who are working for huge organized criminal groups, and that the legal market has absolutely no relationship with the illegal market whatsoever. True crime shows and films might have you believe this picture, but the reality is often far more boring and mundane, far more ordinary. In fact, it's often really hard to tell a totally legit business owner against a business owner who maybe does some legit stuff but also has some illegitimate or some dodgy side hustles going along the way as well. And certainly in the research I did on counterfeiting quite a long time ago, when I was with a group of colleagues, found that many of the people selling the illegal products had legal and legitimate businesses running alongside it, often using it to launder the money. But again, that's another video. My point is, illegal markets, grey markets, unregulated markets are often far more mundane and boring and ordinary than films and true crime would have us believe. But also that the line between illegal and legal is very, very, very blurry. And our willingness to take a step over that line can be impacted by so many things. In fact, we might not even realise we are taking a step over that line. And it's here we find ourselves at the door for the potential for entering unregulated or untested supplement market. So what is it what's driving this? So I think we can identify the optimization culture. So this idea of self-experimentation and self-monitoring to achieve an optimized condition. We can also identify community norms driven by logics of personal responsibility or individual responsibility, but also enhancement and personal enhancement as well. Be responsible for being the best you. We also need to think about social media in all this and how that plays a role in normalizing this, creating the communities which sit around it, contributing towards the demand and supply, and arguably encouraging this kind of competitive individual culture which sits around so much optimization. There's also commercial incentives as well. There are products and services continually being pushed on us. There's a number of examples of really high profile influencers in this space. I've already mentioned a couple, and it'd be easy once again to just go down the usual calling out certain influencers for spreading misinformation or for pushing products which are not scientifically based or not even like approved for sale, and to again call out the role of influencers in the spread of misinformation, but also pseudoscience as well. Perhaps one day I'll do another video on some of these cases, but that's not what this one is about. Because actually where I think it gets really interesting in this investigation is when we follow the money around the legal industries, look at the gaps in the law and look at where harms might be hidden in this intersection between technology, our health, economy, social media, culture, and also just developments in what's possible. So one question we should be asking is who is funding and investing in health at the moment? And asking the question, who is benefiting from optimization culture and biohacking in terms of this huge, huge industry it's turning into? So there's two big groups I want to highlight here. So one is venture capital firms. So they might be firms who are investing in things like digital health technologies or particular like AI products to support a particular health app or something. Maybe they're also funding longevity type stuff, biohacking type stuff. But there's also the corporate investment firms as well. And these are the ones who are funding the ecosystems which enable all of this stuff to happen. And these ecosystems tend to integrate monitoring and prediction, personalization and intervention. And actually, if you look at some of the funders, you will see names of companies you're very, very familiar with. And if this was a true crime explanation, we might be looking at these companies for whether we can find any examples of corruption or laws being broken. But in critical criminology, our question is more about focusing on harmful acts rather than acts which are defined by the law as criminal. And we can think about things like harm and wellness and crime a little bit differently than if we were focusing on a strictly legal definition of crime as being something when we break the criminal law. For me, we don't need to look at people who are breaking the law in order to be able to find huge amounts of hidden harm. And so this is where I would go back to the point where I would argue that big tech is playing a huge role in normalizing the continuous monitoring of ourselves. Big tech is involved in shaping how we monitor not just our sleep and our food, but also our biochemical markers. We become reliant on the infrastructures and products that is funding this rapidly growing self-optimization wellness culture. So for criminology then, we should also be concerned about asking whether that might normalize how things such as unregulated testing and unregulated or untested products, things like the untested peptides or the unregulated, unapproved peptides, how big tech may play a role in how these things gain credibility or legitimacy. And we should be asking about how is all of this contributing to our broader distrust in doctors, our broader questioning of experts and evidence, our critique of big pharma. How is all of this reshaping how we understand and we perceive scientific research and evidence? What impact is this having on public trust of research and scientific evidence? So whilst it might be the case that no criminal laws are actually being broken, that doesn't mean that there isn't a significant amount of broader, perhaps more subtle, embedded and hidden harms happening. So the point I want to make then is whilst everyone is focusing on individuals, so often the influencer or a particularly problematic company, if they have a dodgy product or they're making some misleading claim, or in the case of peptides, whether that's just people showing us their personal experience of doing their own personal research of using them. What worries me is that no one is paying that much attention to the total commercialization and subscription of our bodies to services and products which we need to sign up to long term in order to maintain health or have our best health. Quest for biohacking our body to optimize all of our health metrics is shaped, enabled, and profited from by big tech. So my thoughts about biohacking then is that it's an example of a wellness industry which is fronted by influencers but funded by big tech. And this is why I think we need to be investigating it more closely.